Daniel Dennett is an American philosopher, writer, and cognitive scientist who is still active at Tufts University as a university professor. He is a prominent figure in the philosophy of mind, philosophy of science, and philosophy of biology, particularly as those fields are related to evolutionary biology and studies of human cognition, for which he currently serves as a co-director for the Center for Cognitive Studies. The essay which you read for this session is a real treat. It should help you to gain an appreciation for the kinds of questions that are raised by philosophers regarding personal identity and the nature of consciousness. If you thought that movies like Surrogates, or The Matrix, or The Sixth Day, or Being John Malkovich were entertaining or interesting, and I imagine that the screenwriters for those movies probably took a philosophy class or two once upon a time, then prepare to have your minds truly blown away by this essay. For our purposes, the titular question, "Where am I?" translates to "Who am I?" as a response to the famous exhortation for us to know ourselves. After all, if the unexamined life is not worth living, then we should at minimum know who it is that is doing the living of our lives. And implicitly, the question, "Who am I?" is epistemologically, "Can I know who I am?" Now, in this essay by Dennett, we begin to see some of the reasons why the answer is not as straightforward as we might imagine. Consider the following. Imagine that your brain/spinal column, which are currently hardwired to the rest of your body, is removed. Those hard connections are now going to be replaced with wireless transmitters and receptors. Sort of like a puppet, but with invisible strings. Now that's not such a hard concept, right? Wireless technology, after all, is fairly ubiquitous. Even before cell phones and Wi-Fi connected coffee houses, radio-controlled toys were already commonplace. Of course, making your brain wireless would be incredibly complicated and difficult to pull off, but that's what we're talking about here. So now your brain is suspended in some type of super advanced liquid solution and your body is detached. Now, when you look at your brain, wait, hold on a second. Are you looking at your brain from that vantage point? After all, you don't, quote, see with your eyes. The photosensitive cells and lens-like membranes of your eyeballs are stimulated by light, which are translated into ionized electrical signals that travel to the appropriate data processing nodes in your brain. In other words, you actually see with your brain, not with your eyes. Okay, it's already getting a bit confusing. Are you your brain, where the thinking, feeling, and perceiving happen? Or are you your body, which is the agent that is responsible for the actual interfacing and interacting with the world? Dennett raises some ticklish questions here. And even though the premises of this particular essay are not grounded in currently possible technology, we should consider what kinds of conclusions would logically follow from them. And now you see why logic is both fun and fundamentally necessary in philosophy. In fact, some philosophers and scientists may argue at this point that the question is illogical because it's creating the fallacy of a false dichotomy. That is, they could argue that the mind and consciousness are simply differently manifested aspects of the same physical reality. But we'll get to those perspectives later. Let's say that you answer, "I am my brain," because that seems more convincing to you, where the premises for that conclusion have to do with logically establishing that personhood is synonymous with reasoning, feeling, and choice-making and so forth, which are all activities that happen in the brain. After all, if you saw your best friend tomorrow, and he or she had a different person's brain with that other person's feelings, habits, intuitions, and memories, you'd more than likely treat that person as not your best friend anymore, wouldn't you? He or she may look the same, but would not be the person that you knew. But let's say you've committed some crime. Which should be now incarcerated? Your body or your brain? If you still say your brain because that's who you are and therefore where you are, then imagine if we simply combine your brain. That is, we move it from the laboratory to a prison cell. But your body is free to go, of course. Still wirelessly connected, because to deprive you of your senses would violate a fundamental clause within our constitutional framework that prohibits cruel and unusual punishments. So we can lock up your brain, but we can't turn off your body, and since you are your brain, your body gets to go free. Sound good? The more sensible and realistic answer, of course, is that both your body and brain would be incarcerated. But we're not trying to figure out a solution here as a sentencing judge. This is still a philosophical thought experiment, and we're trying to provide a logically sound response to the question, where am I? Although you're still getting used to logical analysis, at some point during this reading, you should have picked up on an implicit premise that, at first glance, is intuitively true according to our common sense. That is, person X can only be in one location in time-space per moment in time. Simply, you can't be in two or more places at any given moment. Now, I'm not certain whether a denial of that premise would involve some violation of a law of physics, but as far as I'm aware, as a philosopher and not a physicist, it may indeed be possible. Well, at least for exotic subatomic particles to be in more than one place at a time. But at the macro scale of reality, that doesn't seem possible for you and me. The first part of this reading ends with the wireless connection being accidentally and gradually severed between the brain and body. We will continue to discuss the remainder of this essay, but already we have some promising ways to think about personhood, which will be important later when we try to answer the question whether or not we, that is, our individual identities as persons, can persist across time. What makes the person you are today, quote, the same person as you were when you were a child? What's different? What's the same? What if there is no such thing as personal identity? What if you, as such an entity or identity that persists intact across time, is all just an illusion?